The morning sun cast long shadows across the village square as Elena walked toward the marketplace, her worn leather shoes clicking against the cobblestones. She had no idea that this ordinary Tuesday would change her life forever. At 19, she had grown accustomed to the whispers that followed her wherever she went. The villagers all knew her story, the daughter of a once wealthy merchant who had lost everything to gambling debts. Her father, Marcus, had been a respected trader until his addiction to card games destroyed their family's fortune. Now they lived in a cramped cottage on the edge of town, surviving on the meager coins Elena earned from washing clothes and mending torn fabric for the wealthier families. The shame of their fall from grace weighed heavily on Marcus's shoulders, and he spent most days drowning his sorrows in cheap ale. Elena tried to ignore the pitying glances as she made her way to Mrs. Henderson's house to collect the weekly laundry. The old woman always had a kind word and sometimes slipped an extra copper coin into Elena's payment. As she knocked on the familiar wooden door, she heard raised voices coming from inside. "I won't hear another word about it, Mrs. Rysas," Henderson was saying. "The poor girl has suffered enough. But the debt must be paid somehow," came a man's gruff reply. Elena recognized the voice immediately. It was Thomas Blackwood, the most powerful man in their village and the surrounding areas. Elena hesitated, her hand frozen in mid-knock. She knew she shouldn't listen, but something about the urgency in their voices made her lean closer to the door. "Marcus owes me 300 gold pieces," Thomas continued. "I've been patient long enough. Either he pays what he owes, or I'll take what I'm owed in other ways." "You can't be serious," Mrs. Henderson gasped. "Elena is a free woman, not property to be traded." "The law is clear," Thomas replied coldly. "When a debt cannot be repaid, the debtor's family becomes responsible. I have legal documents that give me the right to claim her as payment for her father's debts." Elena's heart began racing. She had heard stories of such arrangements in distant lands, but never imagined it could happen in her own village. The practice of debt slavery was technically legal in their region, though rarely enforced among civilized people. Before she could process what she had heard, the door swung open. Mrs. Canby inhabited that. Henderson stood there with tears in her eyes, while Thomas Blackwood loomed behind her like a dark shadow. He was a tall, imposing man in his 50s, with silver hair and cold gray eyes that seemed to look right through people. "Ah, Elena," Thomas said with a thin smile. "Perfect timing. We were just discussing your family's situation." "I don't understand," Elena stammered, though deep down she feared she understood all too well. Thomas pulled out a rolled parchment from his coat. "Your father signed this agreement 6 months ago. In exchange for the 300 gold pieces I lent him, he promised to repay the full amount within 1 year. That deadline passed last week." Elena's hands trembled as she took the document. The legal language was complex, but the meaning was clear. If her father couldn't repay the debt, she would become Thomas's property until the debt was worked off through service. "This can't be legal," she whispered. "I assure you it is," Thomas replied. "I've had my lawyers review every word. Your father was quite desperate when he came to me begging for money to pay his other creditors. He insisted he would win it back at the card tables within a month." Mrs. Henderson stepped forward, her face flushed with anger. "There must be another way. Elena could work off the debt gradually while remaining free." Thomas shook his head. "I'm afraid not. The agreement is binding. However, I'm not an unreasonable man. Elena, I'm prepared to offer you a choice." Elena looked up from the document, hope flickering in her chest. "You can accept your fate as my property, bound to serve in whatever capacity I deem appropriate," Thomas continued, his eyes gleaming with something that made Elena's skin crawl. "Or, you can agree to marry my nephew, David. He's recently returned from the capital and needs a wife. As my nephew's bride, you would be treated with respect and given a comfortable life." "And if I refuse both options?" Elena asked, though she already knew the answer. "Then the law will take its course and you'll be taken to my estate as a slave. Make no mistake, that life would be far less pleasant than marriage to David." Elena felt trapped like a rabbit in a snare. She had heard whispers about Thomas's nephew, how he had been sent away from the capital under mysterious circumstances, how servants at the Blackwood estate spoke of his violent temper in hushed tones. "I need time to think," Elena said. "You have until sunset," Thomas replied. "I'll return then for your answer. Choose wisely, my dear. Your entire future depends on this decision." As Thomas left, Elena collapsed into Mrs. Clee Party, Henderson's arms, tears streaming down her face. The older woman held her tight, murmuring words of comfort, but they both knew there was no real choice to be made. Marriage to David Blackwood was the only path that offered any hope of dignity or safety. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Elena walked home in a daze, dreading the conversation she would have to have with her father. When she arrived at their cottage, she found Marcus sitting at the kitchen table, staring at an empty bottle with hollow eyes. "Papa," Elena said softly, sitting across from him. "Thomas Blackwood came to see me today." Marcus's face crumbled. "I never meant for this to happen," he whispered. "I was so sure I could win the money back. Just one good hand, I kept telling myself. Just one lucky night." "It's done now," Elena replied, surprising herself with how calm she sounded. "But I need to know, is there truly no other way? Could we sell the cottage? Our remaining possessions?" Marcus shook his head miserably. "I already mortgaged the cottage to another lender, and our possessions wouldn't fetch more than a few silver pieces. Elena, I'm so sorry. I've destroyed your life with my weakness." Elena reached across the table and took her father's weathered hands in hers. "We'll find a way through this," she said, though she wasn't sure she believed it herself. "Tomorrow I'll marry David Blackwood, and somehow I'll make the best of it." That night, Elena lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering what kind of man her future husband would prove to be. She had seen him only once, briefly, when he had returned to the village 3 months earlier. He had seemed ordinary enough, tall and dark-haired like his uncle, but younger and without Thomas's cruel edge. At least, that had been her impression from a distance. As dawn approached, Elena made a silent promise to herself. No matter what challenges lay ahead, she would not let the situation break her spirit. She would find a way to survive, and perhaps even find some measure of happiness, despite the circumstances that were forcing her into this marriage. The sunrise painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, and Elena rose to prepare for what would be the most important day of her life. She had no way of knowing that within a few short months, a single moment of courage in the face of danger would transform everything she thought she knew about her new husband and their arranged marriage. Little did she know that David Blackwood carried secrets of his own, and that the mysterious circumstances surrounding his departure from the capital would soon catch up with them both. The threads of fate were already weaving together, preparing to create a story that would be remembered in their village for generations to come. As Elena braided her long brown hair and put on her only good dress, she couldn't have imagined that her greatest test would not come from adapting to life as a reluctant bride, but from facing down a massive brown bear in the depths of the forest, with nothing but her own courage standing between her husband and certain death. The wedding ceremony took place in the village chapel that same evening, with only a handful of witnesses present. Elena wore her mother's old wedding dress, carefully preserved in a wooden chest for years. The white silk had yellowed with age, but it still fit her perfectly. As she walked down the aisle, she felt like she was moving through a dream, or perhaps a nightmare. David Blackwood waited at the altar, dressed in a fine black suit that emphasized his tall, lean frame. When Elena finally stood beside him, she was surprised to see kindness in his dark eyes, rather than the cruelty she had expected. He spoke his vows in a quiet, steady voice, and when it came time to exchange rings, his hands were gentle as he slipped the simple gold band onto her finger. "I know this isn't what either of us wanted," he whispered so only she could hear. "But I promise to treat you with respect." Elena nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her. Whatever she had expected from this forced marriage, it wasn't compassion. After the brief ceremony, David led her to a carriage that would take them to Blackwood Manor, the family estate located several miles outside the village. The house was impressive, a sprawling stone mansion surrounded by manicured gardens and thick woods that stretched for miles in every direction. Elena's new quarters were in the east wing of the house, far grander than anything she had ever experienced. Her bedroom was larger than her entire family cottage, with tall windows that looked out over the gardens and a fireplace big enough to stand in. A connecting door led to David's room, though he assured her it would remain locked unless she chose otherwise. "I don't expect anything from you," David said as he showed her around her new home. "This marriage was my uncle's idea, not mine. You're free to live your life as you choose, within the bounds of propriety." Over the following weeks, Elena began to settle into her new routine. The household staff treated her with polite deference, though she could sense they were curious about the circumstances of her sudden marriage to their master. Mrs. Hartwell, the elderly housekeeper, took Elena under her wing and helped her understand the rhythms of manor life. David proved to be a man of his word. He was courteous but distant, spending most of his days managing the estate's business affairs or riding alone through the extensive woodlands. Elena began to wonder what had really brought him back from the capital in such a hurry, but she didn't feel comfortable asking personal questions. The mystery deepened when Elena discovered David's habit of disappearing for hours at a time, often returning with mud on his boots and scratches on his hands. When she asked Mrs. Hartwell about it, the housekeeper's expression grew troubled. "Master David has always been fond of the woods," she said carefully, Even as a boy, he spent more time among the trees than in the house. But since he returned from the capital, he seems different, more restless. Elena's curiosity was further aroused when she found David in the library one evening, surrounded by books about tracking, survival skills, and forest wildlife. He looked up guiltily when she entered, quickly closing the book he had been reading. "I didn't mean to disturb you," Elena said. "I was just looking for something to read." "Please, don't let me stop you," David replied, gesturing to the shelves lined with hundreds of volumes. "My grandfather collected books from all over the world. You'll find everything from poetry to philosophy." As Elena browsed the shelves, she noticed several books were missing from a particular section devoted to local history and folklore. When she mentioned this to David, his jaw tightened. "Some books contain information that's better left undisturbed," he said cryptically. Their relationship remained cordial but distant until the day Elena decided to explore the woods on her own. She had always loved nature, and the vast forest surrounding Blackwood Manor called to her like a siren song. Armed with a small picnic lunch and a walking stick, she set off on what she intended to be a short afternoon hike. The woods were more beautiful than she had imagined. Ancient oak and maple trees formed a canopy so thick that the forest floor was dappled with shifting patterns of light and shadow. Elena found herself following a narrow deer path that wound deeper into the wilderness than she had intended to go. She was sitting on a fallen log, enjoying her simple lunch of bread and cheese, when she heard the sound of someone approaching through the underbrush. Elena expected to see one of the estate's groundskeepers, but instead, David emerged from behind a cluster of pine trees, looking surprised to find her there. "Elena, what are you doing so deep in the woods?" "I could ask you the same question," she replied, noting his disheveled appearance and the serious expression on his face. "You look like you've been running." David glanced around nervously before sitting beside her on the log. "I've been tracking something," he admitted, "something that doesn't belong in these woods." "What do you mean?" David was quiet for a long moment, as if debating how much to tell her. Finally he said, "There have been reports of livestock being killed in the surrounding farms. Not by wolves or normal predators, but by something much larger and more dangerous." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. "What kind of animal?" "A brown bear," David said grimly. "A massive one, from the size of the tracks and claw marks I've found. Bears haven't been seen in this region for over 50 years. Something drove this one down from the northern mountains, and it's been moving closer to inhabited areas." "That's why you've been spending so much time in the woods," Elena realized. "You've been hunting it." David nodded. "I didn't want to alarm anyone unnecessarily, but I've been trying to track its movements and find a way to drive it back to the mountains before someone gets hurt." Elena understood now why David had seemed so distant and preoccupied. He had been shouldering this burden alone, trying to protect the local community without causing a panic. "Why haven't you asked for help?" she asked. "Surely the other men in the village would assist you." "My uncle would turn it into a spectacle," David replied bitterly. He'd organize hunting parties and turn the whole thing into entertainment for his wealthy friends. The bear would either be killed unnecessarily, or someone would get hurt trying to prove their bravery. Elena was beginning to understand that David was nothing like his uncle. Where Thomas Blackwood was cruel and self-serving, David genuinely cared about protecting others, even at personal cost. Their conversation was interrupted by a deep, rumbling sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Both Elena and David froze, their eyes meeting in shared recognition of imminent danger. The sound came again, closer this time, the unmistakable growl of a large predator. David slowly reached for the rifle he had been carrying, but Elena could see his hands trembling slightly. Whatever confidence he had shown while tracking the bear alone, facing it with Elena present clearly terrified him. Through the trees, Elena caught sight of movement. Something massive and dark was approaching their position, moving with the deceptive quietness of an experienced hunter. The bear was enormous, easily 8 feet tall when it reared up on its hind legs to get a better view of the two humans who had invaded its territory. David raised his rifle, but his hands were shaking so badly that Elena knew he would never make an accurate shot. The bear dropped back to all fours and began moving toward them, not in an aggressive charge, but in the confident approach of an apex predator that had no fear of the smaller creatures before it. "Don't move," David whispered, though his own body was rigid with fear. "Maybe it will lose interest and move on." But Elena could see something in the bear's eyes that David couldn't. A wild, desperate hunger that spoke of an animal that had been driven from its natural territory and was now fighting for survival. This wasn't a curious encounter that would end peacefully. This bear saw them as either threats to be eliminated or prey to be consumed. Time seemed to slow as Elena realized that her husband, this man she barely knew but who had shown her nothing but kindness, was about to die because his courage had failed him at the crucial moment. She looked at the rifle trembling in his hands, then at the massive predator bearing down on them, and made a decision that would change both their lives forever. Without thinking, Elena lunged forward and grabbed the rifle from David's hands. She had never fired a gun in her life, but she had watched her father clean his old hunting rifle countless times before he sold it to pay his debts. Her hands were steady as she raised the weapon, drew a deep breath, and took aim at the approaching bear. The bear was only 20 feet away when Elena pulled the trigger. The rifle's report echoed through the forest like thunder, sending birds exploding from the treetops in a chaos of wings and frightened cries. The bear stumbled but didn't fall. Elena's shot had struck it in the shoulder, wounding but not killing the massive animal. If anything, the injury only made it more dangerous. With a roar of pain and fury, the bear charged directly at them. Elena had no time to reload, no time to think, only time to act on pure instinct. She threw herself sideways, tackling David and sending both of them rolling behind the fallen log where they had been sitting moments before. The bear's massive paw swept through the air where David's head had been, claws that could have torn him apart, missing their target by mere inches. Elena could feel the animal's hot breath as it reared up again, preparing for another attack. "The knife on my belt," David gasped, his face pale with shock. "Elena? Take it." But Elena was already moving. She scrambled around the log, staying low as the confused and angry bear tried to locate them. The animal's wound was bleeding heavily, and Elena could see that it was favoring its injured side. That gave her an idea. She began throwing rocks and sticks at the bear, not to hurt it, but to anger and confuse it further. Each time the bear turned toward her, she moved in the opposite direction, forcing the animal to pivot on its injured shoulder. The strategy was working. The bear was growing more frustrated and less coordinated with each passing moment. David watched in amazement as his wife, whom he had married barely a month ago, displayed courage and quick thinking that far exceeded his own. Elena moved with a grace and confidence that seemed impossible for someone facing down a creature that could kill her with one swipe of its massive paw. "Elena, what are you doing?" David called out, fear for her safety overriding his own terror. "Trust me," Elena replied, continuing to circle the bear while maintaining what she hoped was a safe distance. She had noticed something important. The bear's aggression seemed to be driven more by pain and fear than by hunger. Its body language suggested an animal that wanted to escape rather than fight. Elena began backing away slowly, moving in the direction that would lead the bear away from the manor and deeper into the woods. She kept her movements steady and non-threatening while maintaining eye contact with the massive animal. "Easy," she said in a calm, quiet voice. "We don't want to hurt you anymore. Go home. Go back to where you belong." To David's astonishment, the bear seemed to respond to Elena's voice. Its aggressive posture relaxed slightly, though it remained alert and ready to defend itself. Elena continued backing away, speaking in soothing tones, until she had created a clear path for the bear to retreat deeper into the forest. After what felt like an eternity, the bear turned and lumbered away, disappearing into the dense undergrowth. Elena waited several minutes to make sure it was truly gone before sinking to her knees, her whole body shaking with delayed reaction to the danger they had just survived. David rushed to her side, pulling her into his arms without thinking. "Elena, that was incredible. You saved both our lives." "I was terrified," Elena admitted, allowing herself to lean against his strong chest. "I've never been so frightened in my life." "But you didn't let the fear stop you," David said, his voice filled with wonder. "When I froze, you acted. When I failed, you succeeded. I've never known anyone with such courage." As they walked back to the manor together, David began to see his wife in an entirely new light. This woman, whom he had married out of obligation and treated with polite distance, had revealed herself to be extraordinary. She had faced down a deadly predator to save his life, showing more bravery in those few minutes than he had displayed in months of solitary tracking. That evening, over dinner, Elena asked David the question that had been troubling her since their encounter in the woods. "What really brought you back from the capital?" she said gently. "And why are you so determined to handle the bear situation alone?" David was quiet for a long time, staring at the wine in his glass. Finally, he looked up at Elena, and she saw a vulnerability in his eyes that he had never shown before. "I was engaged to another woman in the capital," he said, "Lady Catherine Rosewood, the daughter of a powerful duke. It was an arrangement made by my uncle to advance our family's political connections." Elena felt a strange pang of jealousy which surprised her. She had thought she was indifferent to her husband's past, but apparently her feelings were more complicated than she had realized. "What happened?" she asked. I discovered that Catherine was having an affair with my best friend, David continued. When I confronted them, it led to a duel. I wounded him, but the scandal was enormous. My uncle decided it would be best for me to return here until the gossip died down. So you came home in disgrace, Elena said softly. Exactly. And then my uncle forced me into this marriage as a way to settle down and rehabilitate my reputation. I resented it deeply. Not you personally, but the situation. I felt like I was being punished twice for someone else's betrayal. Elena nodded, understanding at last why David had seemed so distant. And the bear? I suppose I saw it as a chance to redeem myself, David admitted, to prove that I could handle a dangerous situation without creating a scandal or needing anyone's help. Instead, I nearly got us both killed because of my pride and fear. Elena reached across the table and took David's hand. You're not a coward, she said firmly. You spent weeks tracking a dangerous animal to protect people who didn't even know they were in danger. That's not cowardly, that's noble. But when the moment came, I froze. David protested. Everyone freezes sometimes, Elena replied. The important thing is that you were out there trying to do the right thing. And when I took the rifle, you didn't try to stop me or let your pride get in the way. You trusted me to act, and that shows real courage too. Over the following days, Elena and David found themselves drawn together in a way that neither had expected. They began taking long walks through the gardens, sharing stories of their childhoods and dreams for the future. The formal distance that had characterized their early marriage melted away, replaced by genuine friendship and growing affection. David showed Elena his private workshop, where he had been crafting furniture and small decorative items as a hobby. Elena was amazed by the beautiful pieces he had created, chairs carved with intricate patterns, jewelry boxes with hidden compartments, and picture frames that looked like they belonged in a palace. I always loved working with my hands, David explained, running his fingers over the smooth surface of a table he had recently completed. In the capital, such activities were considered beneath my station, but here, I can create something beautiful without worrying about what society thinks. Elena began spending time in the workshop with David, learning basic woodworking techniques and helping him with his projects. She discovered that she had a natural talent for the detailed carving work, and David was delighted to have someone to share his passion with. Their relationship deepened further when news came that the bear had been spotted near a neighboring farm, apparently recovered from its wound. This time, instead of handling the situation alone, David organized a proper response with the local authorities and experienced hunters from the surrounding area. Elena insisted on joining the tracking party, despite David's protests. I know that bear better than anyone, she argued. I understand its behavior. You need me there. The tracking expedition was successful, but not in the way anyone expected. When they located the bear, they discovered it had 2 cubs with it. Elena realized immediately that this explained the animal's desperate behavior. It was a mother bear that had been forced from its territory, probably by forest fires or human encroachment, and was trying to find a safe place to raise its young. We can't kill her, Elena said firmly when some of the hunters began preparing their weapons. She's just trying to protect her babies. Instead of a hunt, the expedition became a carefully orchestrated effort to guide the bear family toward a remote section of the mountains where they would be safe from human contact. Elena's understanding of animal behavior proved crucial in developing a strategy that protected both the bears and the local community. The successful resolution of the bear situation made Elena something of a local hero. Stories of her courage spread throughout the region, and she found herself welcomed warmly by neighbors who had previously treated her with polite but distant sympathy as the daughter of a disgraced merchant. More importantly, the shared experience had transformed her marriage into something neither she nor David had dared to hope for, a partnership based on mutual respect, trust, and growing love. The woman who had been forced into marriage to pay her father's debts had become an equal partner to a man who had initially seen her as an unwelcome burden. One evening, as they sat together by the fireplace in David's study, Elena asked him a question that had been on her mind for weeks. Do you ever regret that your uncle forced us into this marriage? David looked at her with eyes full of warmth and honesty. Every day I thank whatever force of fate brought us together, he said. I thought I knew what love was when I was engaged to Catherine. But that was just infatuation with someone who fit society's idea of a suitable match. What I feel for you is completely different. It's based on who you really are, not who I thought you should be. Elena smiled, feeling a happiness she had never imagined possible during those dark days when her future seemed hopeless. When your uncle gave me that terrible choice, I thought my life would. I never imagined it was actually beginning. 6 months later, Elena and David renewed their vows in a ceremony of their own choosing, surrounded by friends who had come to know them as a couple united by love rather than obligation. Elena's father, who had finally conquered his gambling addiction with David's patient help, walked her down the aisle with tears of pride and gratitude in his eyes. The story of Elena's courage in facing down the bear became local legend, told and retold in taverns and sitting rooms throughout the region. But for Elena and David, the most important part of the story wasn't the dramatic confrontation with a wild animal, it was how a single moment of crisis had revealed the strength of character in both of them, laying the foundation for a love that would last the rest of their lives. They never did learn what had originally driven the mother bear from her mountain home, but they often spoke of how sometimes the most frightening upheavals in life can lead to the most wonderful unexpected blessings. Elena's act of courage had saved more than David's life that day in the woods. It had saved them both from lives of loneliness and regret, giving them instead a future filled with love, purpose, and the deep satisfaction of knowing they had chosen each other freely despite the circumstances that had first brought them together.